Greetings to all. I am Marco Ferrari. As I was presented before, I'm an instructor at the Italian Fencing Federation Galletings Research Center in Botticino, Brescia. And I'm an Italian rapier instructor at Guardia di Croce Fencing Club, Opera Nova. As most of you might know, the rapier is the 17th century Western civilian dueling sword. It's that kind of sword. I want to thank my friend Hing for inviting me to attend to this conference. I am very honored and proud to be here, so thank you again. Well, starting with my lecture, when I saw the proposed topic for the conference lectures, I thought I could bring my experience, especially regarding one of them, the cross-cultural influences between different fencing systems. As a researcher of Northern Italian fencing, I think I'm one of the right person to talk about this topic. Indeed, 17th century Northern Italy is a perfect example of how cultural contamination can create a functioning fencing system and bring innovation. And this kind of contamination always takes place on several levels, at least two levels, a cultural level and a street level, as we can say. The first level, the cultural one, is that of the masters, reading each other's treatises and drawing lessons, concept, technique, and languages from them. The second is that of the fencers who confront each other in the street, who dueled in the streets of the European cities, each fighting in their own national style. The duel is when someone became the stranger sword of the other, and the stranger sword is something that you have to face, something you have to understand, and is something that you have to beat. I must therefore make two preliminary remarks before embarking in the discussion. The first premise concerns the fact that in the 17th century Europe, there were three main fencing systems: the Italian, the Spanish, and the French. The Italian system is at the time was strongly rooted in its treatise tradition and goes back to the Middle Ages. In the 16th century, Italy was a sort of fulcrum, a sort of center of spreading of martial culture in Europe. And a lot of treatises from Italian authors were translated in other languages, in French, in German. So Italy had a great tradition of martial culture and the treatise production. The second great culture of 17th century is the Spanish one. The Spanish system, the so-called verdadera destreza, that's the name of this system, was established as an organized and structured system in the 17th century. In Spain, the masters were authorized to teach by the king's law. They created a system in its own that has very particular elements, a very high stance, elegant movement, a circular movement around the opponent, and a very well-refined culture of work on the blade of the opponent. Finally, the French one was another system, was another of the three great European systems of 17th century. And in the second half of the 17th century, France began to produce its first major treatises. And as some of you might know, the French school will flourish in the next century, in the 18th century. The second premise is that Northern Italy at the time was not part of a cohesive nation, but divided into small states with different influences, indigenous and foreign. And this political fragmentation and the coexistence of fencers from different national systems turned Northern Italy into a testing ground for mutual exchange of fencing solution. So in this case, we are speaking of cross-cultural influences, and Northern Italy was the correct place to do this kind of experiment. To prove this thesis, I will use several sources, printed treatises, and free manuscript. The first manuscript is the one of Giovan Battista Cristiani. Which from Pavia. This manuscript is kept in the Tribulziana Library of Milan. It dates more or less 1679, 1681, and the other two manuscripts are the one of Giovan Battista Solza, which is kept in the Brescia Museum of Martial Art, and the one of Master Carlo Dati, which dates more or less in the middle of the 18th century. So it's quite later respect to the other. And then, of course, I will use also as reference the printed treatises, as you can see here, as the one of Alessandro Senese, 1660 from Bologna, always an Italian author from the north. Giovanni Pietro Gorio, 1682, from Milan. And other treatises that I will use is the one of Bondi di Mazzo from Venice, always author from the northern part of Italy. If we take a bird's eye view of the 17th century Italy, we see, in a fencing point of view, of course, if we can see the fencing panorama of 17th century Italy, we see that the southern Italy is characterized by a unique presence of a strong school, which is called the Roman Neapolitan school. This school is strongly identitarian and acts as a kind of protection against external influences. On the other hand, in northern Italy, the lack of a stylistic authority and the political fragmentation worked in an opposite direction, making the ground very permeable to foreign inputs. For example, the style of the northern Italian fencer is so rich in foreign elements that a Neapolitan author, an author from the south, which is called the Duke Giuseppe d'Alessandro, would later say that half of the Italian fencers of this time fenced like the French, and the other fenced like Neapolitan. When he speaks about Italians that fence like the French, that fight like French, he is referring to the authors and the fencers of northern Italy. So he sees them as a stranger, not as Italians. In the same way, the Spanish and the French master of the time tend to identify the Italian fencer with the Roman Neapolitan one, and not with the northern one, precisely because there were too many foreign elements in the fencing of the northerners. Here you see some images, and this is the one on the left is an image of a Spanish treatise which show the way of fighting of an Italian, and his particular trust. This Italian that is depicted here is an Italian from the south. And also you see this frontispiece comes from one treatise from the southern Italian authors. And it depicts the dynasty of masters that founded there a school. In fact, the treatises and manuscript written by the northern authors reflect all the richness of a transnational dialogue. There is a dialogue in their fencing. It's an open fencing, open to influences, and it's full of elements from other systems. So this is my main goal of this lecture, to show how rich could be a system if it borrows, if it takes element from other systems. From a stylistic point of view, I will speak about three types of influence on the Italian martial cultures. The first one is stylistic, the second one is cultural, and the third one is instrumental. From a stylistic point of view, these northern authors, such as Giovan Battista Cristiani, who writes his treatise, his manuscript, did not confine themselves only to analyzing the strength and the weakness of the French and the Spanish combat position and so on, but borrowed several elements. These elements then became structural in their system. Even the style of other masters, such as the Milanese Gorio, seems to have been influenced by continental thinking. There is a French influence in his fighting style, and the master also draws on some Spanish technical elements, such as wide circular movement around the opponent and so on. Another master analyzes the difference between fighting position and footwork of the Italians, of the French and the Spanish. And this is not just a scientific or cultural interest, but is obviously based on observation made on the field, on the sword field. Some of these masters, when they write about the foreign fighters, they tell, I saw them fighting, I saw their students. So there is a strict and daily contact between those fighters and those masters. And for example, on the other hand, here you can see an example. On the other hand, we can see in the treatise of Bondi di Mazzo, we see, which is an author from Venice, we see elements of French fencing. For example, here on the left part, you can see the thrust. The Italian stoccata. The stoccata is a thrust made with a lunge. Okay, you see on the left part the thrust made by the Italian authors of the South. You see that the torso is in a right position, is an upright position. On the right side, you see in the upper corner, you see the thrust made by an author from northern Italy. And under this picture, you can see the thrust made by a French author. As you can see here, the torso is in a diagonal position, and you see that the torso is pushed onward, and this is a French characteristics that is very this is the same in the northern Italian authors. So only to evidence the fact that they borrowed a lot of elements, and also structural and very important elements, such as the morphology of the lunge, of the botta, of the stoccata. A foreigner, from a skirmistic point of view, is always a problem to be solved. And this forced the local masters to work against measures, innovation, imitation, and unexpected elements. During this period, in the 17th century, many Spanish masters were concerned with analyzing foreign fighters and how to deal with them. The French master Liancourt, you can see the picture in the lower corner is from his treatise, but here you can see better. The master Liancourt devotes a large part, 3 long chapters of his treatise to stylistic analysis and answer to counter Italian, Spanish, and German fencers. And in his treatise, he shows an Italian guard. Here you can see the picture of the Italian guard of his time, and this Italian guard is the same depicted and described by the Italian authors of the North. The Italian, of course, Liancourt speaks about the way of fighting different martial cultures, not only the Italians, but also the Spanish and the German fencers. The Italian master, Carlo Dati, it's one of the authors of the 3 manuscripts I quoted before. He writes more or less in the middle of the 18th century, so very later. Carlo Dati presents 4 fighting positions in his system, and one of these 4 guards or fighting position is of French inspiration, and another is of Spanish inspiration. So he describes 4 guards, and 2 are borrowed by abroad. So this is a clear sign that foreign styles were now integral part of Northern Italian system. The foreign influence on Northern Italian authors is not limited to a technical level, but can also be seen on a cultural level. Several masters, including the Milanese Giovanni Pietro Gorio, are captivated by the figure of master of arms as a man of sword and letters, and this was a Spanish idea. In Spain, the master was not only a man of steel, a man of sword, was only a man of pen, a man of culture. And this idea of the master as a knight, as an intellectual, captivated also the Italian authors. And so Giovanni Pietro Gorio devoted a large part of his treatise to speak about the master as a man of culture, as in the Spanish idea, as in the Spanish image of the master. So this was a cultural element that was borrowed by abroad. And the Northern Italian authors also had a clear sense of belonging to an European fighting class. If you think about it, there is a master, Alessandro Senese. Here you can see the frontispiece of his treatise on the right part. Alessandro Senese decided to summarize his treatise and translate the most important part of his treatise into Latin, because at that time Latin was the language of the European cultural elite, such as or an international language such as the English now. So Senese knew that his work in that way would have had an international reach, an international spreading. And finally, to conclude my lecture, from an instrumental point of view, the fencing instruments, it's possible to observe some contamination in northern Italy. For example, the northern part of the peninsula in the 17th century was the first part of Italy to adopt the new sword of French origin, the small sword. It's interesting to note that in the southern Italy, on the other hand, the use of the long rapier of the 17th century will continue until the middle of the 18th century. So where there is no dialogue, no contamination, innovation is slower. Also in the fencing world. For example, Gorio treatise and Solza manuscript are the first Italian treatises to develop system based on the use of the small sword. Here you can see some pictures On the right side, the treatise of French master de Latouche, 1670, which shows the use of the small sword. On the left side, you can see in the upper part, this is an illustration from a treatise from the southern Italy, which shows one fencer on the right part, which is a Neapolitan fencer, so a southern fencer that is using steel rapier. On the left part, there is another fencer, probably a northern Italian fencer, because he make a different stoccata, which is more similar to the one of the north, and he is using a dual sword, more lighter and shorter, and with a disc-like hilt. And this is probably the refiguration of the depiction of a northern Italian fencer. So these weapons were spreading in the second half of the 17th century in Italy, in the northern part of the peninsula. And one of these weapons is also depicted in the treatise of the Ferrarese master, Marin Bresciani. Ferrara is another city from northern Italy. Here you see a French influence, not only in the type of the sword that he is using, but also in the fashion of the clothes and the illustration. In conclusion, I can tell that the example of northern Italy in the second half of the 17th century show how an environment open and receptive to outside influences can produce new and highly versatile fencing systems. Such skirmistic systems not only allow the system itself to progress, but are a source of inspiration and growth to the outside world, because also the other culture who contribute to this dialogue take fruitful element, and this bring benefits to the art as a whole. I want to last thank you for your time and attention. The work I've briefly presented here is a part of a longer and more complex scientific article. I am happy to make it available to anyone who is interested from you. And I will now be glad if you want to answer to any question you may have. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrari.
Hi, how are you, my friend? Thank you.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you for an absolutely inspiring and insightful presentation, which has really opened my eyes to the interaction of Northern Italy with other so-called national systems. Now, you have spoken extensively of how other systems, particularly the Spanish and French, have cross-fertilized with Northern Italy. But in my observation, Italy being an early center of European martial arts and fencing in particular, is also a source of creativity and cultural change. Taking the example of Camilla Agrippa in particular, the scientific method pioneered by Agrippa using geometry and using perspectives, that had a major influence on the notation, on the illustration and perception and teaching of fencing elsewhere in Europe. Is that the case?
Yeah, is that the case? In the 16th century, Camillo Agrippa is an author, as you correctly remark. It's an author from the previous century, and in the previous century, as was in my premise, Italy was of course the spreading point of martial culture, and Italian authors they influenced very deeply all the other cultures. I have a practical example of this. For example, I didn't speak about the German fencing of the 17th century. There is a reason, because the German fencing of the 17th century was still strongly and so strongly influenced by Italian authors. I give you an example. There is an Italian author which is called Salvatore Fabris. He wrote his treatise at the very end of the 16th century. His treatise was translated in German, and a lot of German masters read his treatise and take innovation and solution from him. At the very end of the 17th century, there is a French author called Liancourt. He shows how the German fight. We are at the very end of the 17th century, so a century after the treatise of Salvator Fabris. He shows the German Guard, and the German Guard is the same of Salvator Fabris. So the German authors take all from him, and in a century of development of martial art, they still use a guard that is similar to the Salvator Fabris guard and other elements that are similar to this author. So this is something that shows how deep and rooted was the influence of Italian authors on the other martial cultures. But in the 17th century, also the other martial cultures were creating their systems. And these systems influenced the Italian one, but were, of course, influenced by the Italian one.
Thank you very much, Marco. I'll pass the mic back to the Master of Ceremony, but before doing so, I just want to say, please don't give your paper to anyone, because we need to publish it. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrari.
Thank you. Can I make 3 thanks before leaving?
Yes.
I want to thank, first of all, Roberto Gotti, which opened his collection to me. He gave me a lot of material, and all the treatises that I have analyzed are some of comes from his collection. He's a man that loves fencing, and he's precious for that. I want to thank also, of course, my friend Hing for having invited me here, and I want to thank Francesca Romana, who is my girlfriend. She helped me to prepare my speech, and I want to thank Alberto Marzona, which is one of my students that helped me to translate my work. I hope to see you all soon, and if some of you wants material and my article, it's free for you. I will send it to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrari.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you again, and bye.
Thank you. See you.